Marriage age, as I mentioned, there was reduced only in the 8th AD. Before that, when they attended the Gurukulas, they studied many subjects. It is not just restricted to the household or the art or the music. They had a whole lot of the plethora of the subjects. Some of the subjects, we are talking about metallurgy, wind, water, space science, environment, solar studies, astronomy, geography, time studies, geology, mining, gems, metal, gravity, energy, communication, etc. Satyabhama, Sita, Shurpanakha, Urmila, Savitri, Mandodari, Rukmini, Hidimba, all they have received their the training in the Gurukulas, and they were skilled warriors. Good morning, friends. Let me start. Before that, let me share my the screen. Then we can start from there. Since I come from a corporate world, and this is the simple way of uh, sharing the knowledge using the slides. In between, I will also talk about the narration style. Here, I want to, before I start the topic on the status of women in ancient India, I would like to give you a brief about the narration. As we all know, there are many gaps in the history when it comes to the Indian history, which is complex, and in the today's date is inconsistent and a bit of informal, and due to various reasons. So we refer the evidences such as the scriptures, the temple murtis, carvings, books, and we build the logic around. And what I'm going to share is, of course, not the ultimate. And people like me, the citizen journals, have been very active since the Modi government came into power in 2014. And many of us are taking a lot of interest in Hinduism and Hindu culture from various sources and spreading the knowledge. Now, let me go to the topics what we are going to cover. The topics here I mentioned for the entire session, but the session is going to be longer than we expected, so we will break them into two. The topics are going to be: first part is the overall value of women. Then we will talk about what is this birth of the girl child and the concepts and misconcepts around that. Then we talk about the education and the early life for the girl child. Then the second is, of course, the career. That career in terms of here is a participation of women in the military and administrative field. Also, we will talk about a couple of slides on their participation in the professional world. Then the remaining topics, that is a marriage, the motherhood, rituals and customs, and lifestyle legacy summary. Those we will cover in the second part of this series. And both the series will have a Q&A session. So this is how we will basically move from. And now, before I start the topic, I would like to basically narrate a story, a very story we all love. And the story is from Ramayana. We all have come across this story. The Kakai, the second consort of the king Dashratha, she was very different from his other two consorts, that is Kaushalya and Sumitra. Kaikai was a skilled and capable warrior. Additionally, she was a Dashrath's trusted companion on many of his military expeditions. She also participated in social campaigns, military campaigns, and the other administrative activities. And she was one of the very few warriors in her days. She hailed from a kingdom called Kaikaya, and as per the tradition in those days, she was named after the kingdom. And the two battle is primarily mentioned, and about Kaikai's the heroism. That is, Kaikai accompanied King Dashratha, where they were engaged in the battle against uh, Sambhasura, who was the enemy of King Indra and Dashrath. And during the battle, it happened that the chariot wheel was broken. The Kaikai was very vigilant and she jumped from the chariot. And in order to balance the chariot, she inserted her hand into the wheel that worked as axis. And the chariot remained stable, and that helped Dasharath to win the battle. This is a story, and of course, after the battle, the Dashrath came to know about the Kaikai and her act and the uh, um, uh, how she saved his life, and also uh, um, the her heroism and everything. And he gave her two boons, and which, of course, she used at later stage, and that is how Rama went to exile. This story we all have heard, but we never this never occurred to us while referring this story. How in those days, what is the status of women? The Kaikai was a warrior, and that too in the Ramayana, and Sri Ram's mother, and she participated in many activities. So that tells the volumes about how women participated in many activities, right? So from that story onwards, let me take you ahead with our the main presentation or the session. Let me give you the definition. The women's status is depend on the degree of freedom they have in any society to move freely in the society, to participate in the public life, and their decision making processes in house or outside. This is what, in general, we talk about the women's status. Again, women's contribution in the society, in the academic, professional, social, personal life also matters, right? And when we talk about Indian society, we have plenty of examples in India. However, some of them are not well documented, as we have seen the story of Kaikai. And some of the information is what we call conflicting, incomplete, or inconsistent, as the information has lost. And then again, availability of the information to track back the sources is also become limited. And moreover, we are talking about the society which was thriving in the Vedic era that has basically uh, plunged into the struggling society. Now, this struggling society also impacts on both men and women. It is not just women who suffered. Okay, so we will again talk that at the later stage. Okay, and next we are going to talk about some of the misconcept around the women's status. Now we are talking about the women, the history or the status or their, um, their participation. All these are basically written by the historian, primarily from the one who were during the British era, and those scholars like Macaulay's, Weber's. I'm talking about the early part, which we are currently referring all this history. This history, if we are talking about, which is again from the perspective of like European uh, perception, and then their understanding of Indian scriptures or their understanding of Indian complex societies, and their understanding of was again about the language and the references. All that part basically has put their narratives and the perception to a limited state. Next, we talk about they came with some geopolitical beliefs, and of course, their religion was different. And their when they wrote this history at that time, the rulers' vision was very different. So they have to cater to all these needs before they write those histories. Okay, and this has basically greatly influenced on what the narration was created. So this is basically a brief I'm giving you the misunderstanding. Over a period of time, we will see this part at several stages. The birth of the girl child. In the ancient times, most of the societies where patriarchal societies who valued the son over daughter. I'm not talking about India, but it is a global perspective. And the reason son were preferred over the daughters were because they added a value to family for defending the family or the society, or participating in fighting or participating in the battles to expand the territory and help the society to survive. These were the advantages were there. However, in contrast, daughters had some disadvantages because the society had to take care of the time and efforts to protect and upbring in their upbringing. Right now, in this case, I would like to share some contrast in the Vedic time. In the Vedic time, in fact, the daughters were preferred in many parts of the India because the daughter fetched the money during the wedding, as the bridegroom would pay the handsome money to marry a talented and a beautiful daughter. Of course, it was totally prohibited in the Manusmriti, because Manusmriti says that any form of exchange of wealth during the wedding is strictly prohibited. And additionally, Indian society also practiced the polygamy, and the women were absorbed in the large families. They supported the families in the earnings, upbringing of children, managing the household, and also in the agriculture, family businesses. You can see them at later stage also when we talk about the profession. They also worked in the textile industry, and there were many cottage industries were there, and they supported the family in their livelihoods. Now, here, when I would say that women were daughters were also preferred, there are in the Vedas special rituals are performed for begetting the daughter as well as son. So it is basically individual choice, I would say, to opt for a son or a daughter. In various Indian culture, the talented daughters and the well-mannered daughters were a matter of pride. And if you see, the same was mentioned in the case of Sita Ma and also Draupadi. Their parents, their father were very extremely proud of their daughters, and because of the various quality they possessed. And now, the part I would like to say it is not that unpopular what it is projected that the daughters were not preferred. Daughters were very well preferred, as I mentioned earlier. So this narrative is basically a little bit of a doubtful. And second most, the talked topic about is a female infanticide, which is, I mentioned several times, that by the intellectual, which doesn't seems to be very popular, because Manu Smriti and other Smritis mention that destruction of an embryo or the child is the most heinous crime. Even if it happened, it could have happened in a small section of a particular community in particular time for some weird reason, but in the ancient time, but it doesn't seems to be a common practice, or there is no mention of this elsewhere. Now, next part, we want to talk about overall the how the women were respecting, because before we start education, we talk about the education for the women. We want to also talk about how the women were treated in general. So some of the quotes I have taken from the Manusmriti, which to basically authenticate, because Manusmriti is considered as the what we call ultimate source for our the culture and how we live, and our customs and rituals, and a lot of things are basically derived from the Manusmriti. And very surprisingly, when I started reading that, those then what we read in general, some articles and some videos often, those are a lot different than what actually it is mentioned in the Manusmriti. So some of the shlokas I mentioned here. Now, if you see the first one here, it talks about Santushto Bharyaya Bharta Bhatra Bharya Tathevich Yasminev Kule Nityam Kalyanam Tatra Ve Dhruvam. So the family or the clan, it just simply meaning is a family or clan where the women is happy or satisfied with the husband's behavior, and the husband is also happy with the wife's behavior. The prosperity is ensured in that clan or the family. In general, there's basically the family prospers wherever the women are happy, and of course the men are also happy. So here we are not talking about just treatment of women; it is a equality. So it is the what we call responsibility of both the husband and wife to basically maintain the peace and happiness in the family. Okay. Next, we are talking about here is that this particular quote says, "Shochanti jamyo yatra vishyatanshu tatkulam, na shochanti tu yatrita vardhate tadhin sarvada." Here it is clearly mentioned about what a husband should not do. When husband abuse wife or indulge in a prostitution or have extramarital affairs, etc., and that causes suffering and the sadness to the wife, to his wife, his clan will be destroyed soon. So all these things are basically mentioned not to be done. So in general, it is giving you the idea about what is the ideal the husband's the behavior should be within the married life. So another the shlok which I picked up here, it is talking about is Pitru Bratu Vish Chaita Pati Birdev Restha Puja Bhushyan Vascha Bahu Kalyani Mi Pushubi. All men in the house, that is father, brother, husband, brother-in-law, etc., keep women happy by treating them respectfully, speaking them in a sweet, madhur is a sweet I've taken, sweet voice, keeping her in a pleasant mood without causing any stress to her. This is very important, and also presenting her the jewelries, good clothes, good food, etc. If you want prosperity, do not clash and fight with her. So you need to do all those things in order to keep women in the family happy. So if you're looking at the broader perspective, everywhere it is mentioned that respecting women, gifting them, treating them respectfully, talking to them respectfully, and also giving them adequate what we call the shelter, food, and the good treatment. All of them is mentioned everywhere in the Manusmriti. Now, the next is the last, but the most popular we talk about is Yatra Naryastu Pujante Ramante Tatra Devataha Yatra Tastu Na Pujate Sarvastra Phala Kriya. Here we are talking about where women are worshipped, the god also resides in those houses. Where women are not worshipped or disrespected, no work will be succeeded or there will be no prosperity in that house or place. So there are plenty of examples in the Manusmriti where you will see the how women should be treated in the family and in the society. Now here is you can ignore that, but it's just simply talks about that even today when you see women, the modern girls and women earning women, they spend a lot of money and time buying the jewelries and buying good clothes, and again the expectation is respectful behavior or the respectful treatment. So all this is also same thing has been repeated here, how women should be treated. Okay, and some of the pictures I have taken from the internet to show you how the women's were actually lived those days. Now, after talking about overall respect for the women during that era, or what is the ideal treatment to the women in the society, we will move to the childhood part. Now, when I talk about the childhood, I given the examples here. The daughters were given equal opportunity to prosper, unlike what we understand or we read that the son were preferred or the son's prosperity was preferred. However, that was far from true. The daughters were given equal opportunity. In the Vedic time, primary education was imparted by family elders or in the local temple, and advanced level of education after age 9 or 10 was given at the gurukuls. So the students left home and joined the gurukuls under the celebrated gurus. The brahmacharya was followed by both girls and the boys during the training in the gurukulas. Now there are some examples also in the childhood. You will see it's not only education but also that the girl child was spoiled, like the example of a Devyani. And also there is an example of the Savitri and her happy childhood as a princess. And then the girls were also preferred over the boys in welcoming guests, and they were given the responsibility of taking care of the guest. So this is the most important responsibility during those days, because those basically resulted into the negotiations and also the deals, and all the thing were basically happened during those stays. Okay, so that is how important the girls' role was, in the Vedic time. Now, coming to the next topic is in the education. Now, in as I mentioned in the previous slides, girls were given an opportunity to study, and they also attended the gurukulas. The Rigveda and Upanishada to mention the several women sages, that is the Rishikas and seers. Are the women rishis or the sages who basically imparted the knowledge. Since Rishika was a special term for the women sages, so it was not uncommon that the women scholars were around. If you see, there are the list of Rishikas in the Vedic eras. For example, there is a Aditi Dakshyani, Apala Atreyi, and Dakshina Prajapatya, Gosha, Godha, Indrayani, Juhu, Lopamudra, Ratri, and Romasha, Sarama, Sarpanjani, and there are the huge list of there. Even there is Sachi, Shraddha, Saikta, Surya, Urvashi, and many more. They have basically contributed in writing some of the verses in the Vedas. In ancient era, to impart the education to the children, and that is both son and daughter, was common, and it was considered as an important duty of the parents. The discipline and the education was considered as an essential for both. And if you see the famous Upanayana ceremony, what it is performed even today for the son, which was also performed for the daughter. Unfortunately, that was discontinued when the women's marriage age was reduced from about, I think, 16 to 9 and 10. And the Upanayana became a bit of informal, and later it was discontinued. Until the 3rd of BC, girls in India would get married at the age of 16 because they were busy with their education. That is primary education until the age of 9th and 10th, and then later the higher education in the Gurukulas till the 15 and 16. But however, the marriage age, as I mentioned, there was reduced only in the 8th AD. Before that, when they attended the Gurukulas, they studied many subjects. It is not just restricted to the household or the art or the music. They had a whole lot of the plethora of the subjects. Some of the subjects, we are talking about metallurgy, wind, water, space science, environment, solar studies, astronomy, geography, time studies, geology, mining, gems, metal, gravity, energy, communication, etc. There's like, if you see the list of more than 50 subjects were taught in the Gurukulas in those days. And women also participated in most of them. There was no discrimination whatsoever that what kind of a topic they should suggest, or a particular subject was meant for men or the women. They all freely chosen their subjects and pursued their higher studies. Now, the Vedas and the literary education was more popular among the Brahmanas, Kshatriyas, and Vaishyas. However, there are also some examples of the Shudras being part of the Vedic studies and also the higher studies. Now, next, again, I would like to talk about the little more detail about the Vedic studies. Now, there were two types of the studies. One was Brahmavadinis and Sadhyo Das. Brahmavadinis were about meant for the scholars who intend to pursue their academic career during their lifetime. So they primarily studied theology, philosophy, and other subjects taught in the Gurukul, but they were basically career women. And the second one is Sadhyodas was common women who studied until the age of 14 to 16 before they got married. And here they learned the Vedic hymns for the daily and periodic prayers, and which is used for the rituals, sacraments, and in which they need to take part after their marriage. In Ramayana also it is mentioned that how Sita Ma is to perform her daily prayers, which is mentioned here. Apart from Vedas, women also studies uh, Purva Mihmahasas, and it is mentioned about some of the famous theologists, which is the Casa Cristana is a famous theologian composed Mimamsa known as Casa Christini. The ladies who designed were known as Casa Cristanas, that is mentioned here. So it is not one person who did it. So there were several women who did it. So that is how the designation is formed and given. So that speaks a volume about how many women's were there. Like if you're talking about Upadhyay, Upadhyayani, and like here it is also the teachers, and we are talking about the scholars, Rishikas. All these designations basically indicate that it is the, many women scholars were around at the time. Now, women scholars in the ancient India, some of the names are of course mentioned. In Puranas, the story of Kahoja, Sujata, Ruru, and Pramodavara studied in Gurukula in the co-ed system. So it, unlike what we hear that the women were not part of the Gurukul, sometimes this kind of a narrative we see, but that is far from true, where it's not only they studied, but they also studied in the co-ed system. Women scholars were part of Puranas as well, which I have mentioned some of the names, but here some more. This Bhagavata, two daughters of Dakshina, were expert in theology and philosophy. Lopamudra, Viswara, and Sikata, Nivavari, Ghosha. These are some of the women authoresses of the Rig Veda. Even in Vedic sacrificial religion, the women participants were there. Okay, and here it is Maitri is also belong to that class. Lady scholar Gargi, of course, which is very known to us, and was a spokesperson of a distinguished philosophers in the court, and she confronted uh, many scholars during that time. Atri is another lady scholar, student of the Vedanta, who studied under the renowned sages. And those are Valmiki and Agastya. Now, this Jayanti, daughter of King Saharnika of Kaushambi, remained unmarried and received ordination from the land of Mahavira. In the 18th century, also, Bhavabhuti, in his Malti Vadava, represented the Kamnadaki, who educated along with Bhuri, Vasu, and Devrata. This also indicates the co-education system. Now, there are many other examples are there. So all in all, it just we can see that how many scholars were there and women warriors were there, rulers there in ancient India. During the first millennium of the Christian era, now the Hindu society was flourishing, the rich people, especially from the Rajput, Maratha, Nair, Zamindar, etc., they employed scholars and who could come home and give the impart the education to their daughters. Even during the British era, they were the British governors used to come, nannies, and the governesses would come and teach the princess. However, in the 8th century AD, the women's education started depleting for various reasons. And those reasons, I don't mind hesitating to inform that the A is that there was a bit of the influence of the Christian era. Then there is an invasion took place, and uh, in order to protect the daughters, then the sending the daughters to the Gurukul and all that the practice has been almost reduced and later discontinued. But when women would basically learn the Vedas in their family, from their family and also at the local temple, they would primarily learn the Vedas and also the many other life skills. And if you see, the music, dance, art was taught to the daughters during their early life. And even this is in vogue even in the southern part of India. Women are given an opportunity to learn the Bharatanatyam, the classical music, and many other arts. And women would often recite the Sama hymns during the ladies' functions. The art of sewing, stitching, garland making, toy making, house decorating, painting, textile weaving, etc., were taught to the young girls, and this was a part of the education. Even writing Kadambari and the novel or the poem was a pastime for many young girls during those days. And this was created as a part of the hobby, which is now considered as a highly skilled art in the today's world. The concept of education is different. In the British era or the European concept of the is that your reading and writing ability and studying in a structured format. However, that was different from what we had. We had a little bit of a fluid. The is a life skill was also considered. Vedas was also considered as part of the education, and many other skills were also incorporated so that they could lead a successful life. All this was as a part of the education. There is no, the rigid, uh, the syllabus was given in order to consider them as educated, right? Now, I'm just giving you the glimpse of the status. Like the first school in England was opened in formal school. We are talking about opened in 1811. At the time, India had around 7,32,000 gurukuls and around 100% literacy. The most gurukuls taught various subjects apart from Vedas and religious studies, which I already narrated some of them studies. So there were about 50 plus subjects were taught. Now, the women education depleted rapidly in later stage. If you see, there were only like 1,023 girls against 1,57,664 boys in 1826. This is from one, I think, Presidency College data. It is. This is not representing the entire India's the literacy. And this is just given here as an example how the education is depleted. But here I want to bring it to your notice that this kind of a data is useless because this kind of data is not considering the girls, um, the primary education at home, and girls is basically learning their life skill and earning. That part is basically not considered. And if you see women, the India as a culture, whether it is from the Vedic time and all, so we had a lot of cottage industries and all which flourished, and women also participate in the family businesses and also help their husband in earning money. So um, learning what today's terms like a BA, BCom, BSc is not considered as valuable as learning those life skills. So the perception is different, and even that perception, even today, is basically debatable whether you need to have a graduation to have a job, or you can have some life skill and earn your livelihood. So this is need to be like considered. The female education disappeared in Hindu community. This has been a narration, but I just don't agree with that, because even though women were unlettered, especially during the Mughal and the British era, the common where women were unlettered means they could not read and write. However, they were taught the Vedic life, customs, values, and many other things. The education was given, and they were the loyal custodian of the Indian culture, which they passed on to the next generation in their joint family system. This is the most important part we need to remember that. And even they were unlettered, I would say they were not uncultured. They were highly cultured ladies. And these women, they learned religion, custom, rituals from the village Puranikas. Now, this part is not considered as a part of the education in many of the studies. The again here we talked about the end of the Gurukul. Again, this also we can just skip, and I'll add to the end of the session at later stage. Now we'll come back to here after the education, how women have used their education in the professional life. Now the professional life I have divided into two. One part is the governance and the military for the rulers and the Kshatriya families, and the second part is for the commoners. The girls from the ruling families or the Kshatriya families received the military as well as administrative training. This was important case as they had to rule the kingdom in absence of head of the male family members, such as a father, husband, son, when they are gone for the military expeditions, or in case of their death. This is part of the life skill imparted for defending the hearths and the homes in the times of danger. After education, women like Shakuntala, Kunti, Lopamudra helped their fathers in managing their kingdom and household. Of course, we also talked about the Kaikeyi. There are the examples of Kaikeyi which we talked about. Satyabhama, Sita, Shurpanakha, Urmila, Savitri, Mandodari, Rukmini, Hidimba. All they have received their the training in the Gurukulas, and they were skilled warriors. It is common in the Chalukya, Rajput, Maratha administration to have women rulers, governors, and administrators. For example, Vijaya Bhattarika from the Chalukya dynasty, Jizamata Shivaji Maharaj mother. And Jizamata, in her days, she was a skilled warrior and she studied the Vedas and Puranas. And that is how she, along with her husband, created a vision of founding the Maratha Empire, and they have basically shaped Shivaji Maharaj's fate accordingly. And Tarabai, she's Shivaji Maharaj's daughter-in-law. In fact, I would say Tarabai is the one. She ruled from the Kolhapur and decimated Aurangzeb's rule by engaging him for 28 years long battle. So that her contribution cannot be ignored. It's very significant. That is how the Mughal, the empire was destroyed. And of course, we all know about Rani Lakshmibai, Durgavati, Kittur Chinnamma, Ahilabai, Sugandha, Didar of Kashmir. All these women basically, in some way, participate in the governance and military expeditions, or military expedition, not both. Additionally, there were also queens, as Kurma Devi, Queen of King Samarasas, took over the administration and defended the kingdom against the attack from Qutb Uddin. Rani Bhima Bai, the daughter of Yeshwantabai Holkar, led the troops. Now, there are many other where the warriors' names are given. Even the Kamlabai Scindia's also name was mentioned for the military and warfare strategies. Okay. Now, the women in the professional world. Now, during the Vedic era, we talked about Aryans were engaged in the military and all the semi-military activities. So the main relied on the women in the field of agriculture, manufacturing of the bows, arrows, or other war material. Samhita mentions that women engaged in the basket making, dyeing, embroidery, weaving, teaching, singing, dancing, etc., to become a self-reliant. Women become independent due to their training during their childhood. Textile industry was very, very important and prosperous in India down to the 1850 AD, where the women contributed significantly. Post-Vedic period, few professions such as teaching, writing became popular. Now, this Acharnavi is another designation for the women teachers. Now I mentioned a few more designations earlier. So this is also, so this is very common to see the women teachers in the society. Occasionally, women enter into the main bastions such as medicine, businesses, art, and music, dance also, and made left their mark. Women with the classical dancing and the singing skills were revered among the high class, especially in the southern part of India. Some women served as a chori bearers, battle carrier, fan servants, and also some of them were like a hairdresser, the doorkeeper, and many other activities. They participated in the royal families or in the jamindars. In the Buddhist literature, in the 380, there is a story mentioned that women was promising her dying husband that not to worry about uh, the wife and the children. She was capable of taking care of them. You know, so that is how they were self-reliant. Kautilya's Arthashastram also mentions that the destitute women should be given work such as spinning, weaving, coloring, or dyeing, we would say, which fetched the good money as the clothes were expensive during the ancient time. As time passed with the invasion of the conservative Middle Eastern and the British culture, the power and the respect that women enjoyed in the past were lost. Against the social reformers in the independent time worked hard and pre and the post independent, and you can see the women the status has changed.
Thank you so much for that great session, Sandhya ji. We will now start with the question and answer session.
Namaste, Sandhya ji. I would love to know what texts you could suggest as a reference for people like me to study more on our own about all these things you covered. That was my first request to you. You mentioned something that I found very interesting is that women weren't lettered, but they were educated and trained in Vedic knowledge. Now, growing up in Bharat, I understand that you can impart a lot of training and education. People can be civilized and cultured. But you said Vedic knowledge. So I wondered, at some point, wouldn't they have to study language and study the texts? If you could give throw some light on that, please.
Let me give you the answer to your first question. I will give you the books in the next slide sessions. There are few books I referred, and the most important book I would say is that Manusmriti, which is most what we call unpopular among the modern scholars, and they have somehow made him villain, which is far from true. You need to read yourself in order to understand the factual details. That's where I've deliberately shared some of his shlokas in order to understand, to share the actual the literature, because that comes up. Then if when we the second part is that I used to read a lot, and among them, if you see the story of Ramayana, which I shared, if you can and find out this kind of stories and able to connect the dots and see, yes, what was the fact? Was the women really oppressed? So, and how they participated, you can easily see them from the Ramayana, Mahabharata, even in the Vedic Vedas also. If you read them, rituals like any rituals you see, yagya if you want to do, or any rituals, there is no ritual is complete without wife sitting next to the husband. So this kind of a observation, if we have, or when we read or able to connect, you can easily able to relate that to the status of women in the ancient, what we call, time. And again, during the next part of this session is very interesting, where we are going to talk about the marriage and also we will talk about the motherhood. We will talk about the rituals and customs. At that time also we will connect many of the points, and this is about the reading. And there are some books also available which talks about the women's the status in the ancient India. I will refer you to one or two books so you will get some idea about it. And this is how I have been reading since last 20 years, and this is my favorite subject. In fact, matter of the fact is that I was writing about the feminism, but over a period of time I saw what I read was very superficial and it was not the correct picture, and then I started reading the correct one, and this is the result of the session. This is what I read. And the second part, so, is about women were unlettered and but they were not uncultured. That was only for the some part during the British rule, not the entire time. During the Vedic period and the pre-Mughal period, women could read and did attend the primary school and also the gurukuls. So they were very well aware about the reading and writing as a skill, but it is the, even I wouldn't say reading and writing skill, but they were much more than they were beyond the reading and writing skill. They were expert in many areas.
Ma'am, my question was, as I am pursuing PhD in the subject of temple management, so I want to ask, is there any evidence or is there any involvement of a woman in the temple management or in the temple day-to-day activity during the ancient time of India?
Yes, you will find a few examples. The temple, as you are already pursuing the PhD, I'm sure you must be knowing, the temple had played different role, socio-economic, academic, and also for the political reason, even for the judicial reasons in many places, right? So when we're talking about the academic part, you will see that women played a significant role. And especially, in fact, I have seen during my childhood, I'm talking about in 70s, when I went to my grandmother's house, there was a temple in the village, and the temple had it was for worshipping. Even people performed wedding there, and it also served as a a place for the primary education where the children would go there and study. So during that time, so you would see the women would participate in all the activities actually.
Namaste, Sandhya ji. Thinking women were so accomplished in earlier times in Bharat, and in so many walks of life also, different professions. So when they were pursuing all these studies, or they were into farming or artistry, it was like a full-on profession. How were they managing home as well? Because I don't have a picture in my mind, and these days I find that the current atmosphere, it's a real difficult struggle. I don't think that's very compatible for a human being to manage. Not that women are not competent, but it's not conducive to growth.
Yes.
So I wondered about how did it work in those days? Was the society structured in a way where such women would be supported by other aspects of the society so they can continue these professions? How did it work?
This is a really, really great question. There's a lot of information hidden in this, and this will give you complete different perspective towards the life. Actually, it's not just a question. This is a huge the source of inspiration for even the modern women. Now, let me take you back a little bit about how the household was there during those times. And they lived in a very close-knit society. Close-knit society means people would informally able to communicate and go to each other's house, and able to seek the help and give the help. And in addition to that, there was a joint family system. Even that joint family system is also exist even in India today also. I traveled to Nainital. I'll just give you the example. Even when I travel in the rural part of India, I see that it is very common to see that the joint family system is still exist. And I was talking to a group of women and I asked them, they come for the walk. I said, how do you manage your household? They said, we have very simple bifurcation that we take care of the children, and our daughter-in-law take care of the cooking and household work. But we manage the children, and that is the best thing. What they have done is that, you know, the elderly folks, that especially the grandmothers, they imparted the knowledge to the grandchildren. They look after them while their mothers were busy in the other activities. And also the children, they lived home only until age of 10. So till the 10, that knowledge and care was given by jointly given by many what we call women members in the family, in the joint family system. So, and again, when the child left for the Gurukul at the age of 10, so then they again they were taken care by the teachers at the Gurukul. So this joint family system was really, really important. I would, even from my own the experience, I would like to narrate here. I worked in investment banking area for a very long time. I worked in Manhattan and Hong Kong and many areas. So during that time, when my son was born, I felt so helpless, as you mentioned here. I wish I had additional member in the family, and especially family member who could give the care as I do to my child. And even though we have the help in the form of maid and all, we can't substitute that with a family member. And even they are there, but the values and the knowledge and the culture, the customs, rituals, nothing will be taught to the child. Not this information, which is very crucial, which will never be passed on to the next generation. Again, I'm giving you another part of the what we call side of the story, is that even though I strongly now value the joint family system, and this which would have given quite a bit of a freedom to the young professionals to perceive their profession and focus and excel in their career, if they had that additional help or additional support in the family in terms of so, but unfortunately, even other side is that the mother-in-law or the mother also don't want to be part of the family. They also want their own freedom these days. So it is not just you and me want. So somehow this we need to basically see how we can create that conducive environment within the family. It is not possible, as you correctly mentioned, to do so many things. One more recommendation I can have is we all want to basically impart the valuable cultural information and also the knowledge to our next generation. You can help, you can send your child to the what we call summer camps, and this kind of there are several summer camps are happening in this area where children can learn the Gita, Ramayana, Mahabharata, and many other Indian scriptures, and they get exposed to, and that will form their thought process. Even I published one book called Dincharya. If you can help your child, that will take away some part of your stress, because that talks about how the child should follow a day from morning to evening, and that is a very structured manner. So that will you can inculcate that discipline, the knowledge, the mantras, and the culture at a very young age, and also they will remain focused and also productive.
Thank you for all that. I just wondered that with the joint family, you mentioned that the daughters-in-law would take care of the home cooking and the mothers-in-law would take care of the kids. What about the women who are professionals? Would that mean that some of them who went in the professional line, others would take care of the home? Is that how they balanced it?
They can balance it. As I mentioned, I was expecting me to have some family members coming over, so that we have the help at home, right? So they if they can just be around and teach the child, not necessarily they do the household work, because it will be difficult for them. But if there is any understanding, everyone share that one. I don't see, because I myself do all kind of a work in the house, so there is nothing wrong in that, because that is our house. And especially when you live in the US, so there is no option, you have to do yourself, right? So I find it was very difficult for me to hire a governess at that stage and pay her the 2,000 USD, which was a standard payment for the nanny. So these are all difficulties are there. So either still I feel that having a family member would have added more value to my child's upbringing, especially in terms of the teaching.
I wanted
Shikar.
to ask about abortions. Before I do, just a little prelude to that. I believe that both patriarchy and feminism, as it is practiced in today's terms, has become something that emphasizes on women being autonomous units. Whereas I believe equality as to what women are asking for is to be able to contribute valuably as one united unit. Be that as it may, with the sex ratio of India increasing to almost 1:1 now, I don't think infanticide or feticide are any longer social issues that have to be worried about. However, abortions are. What I basically mean through that is that while legally abortions are very easy to make, we are not the despotic and hellish land like America has become in terms of that. But my question is aimed at asking, what is the view of abortion through the eyes of the Vedic society? Since you mentioned that the Manusmriti says that it is sinful to destroy an embryo. So, of course, in those days, patriarchal men or men under the garb of patriarchy who wronged women in ways that you would find them do now was way lesser. How exactly can we imply the learnings of the Manusmriti to today's scenario of how women are victims to sexual violence and therefore accidental pregnancies through that?
This is very crucial question. And as I earlier mentioned, the abortion or the destroyal of the embryo is considered as a heinous crime. And that remains true. If you see, there were Gandharva Vivah, or the marriages happened, not in the purview of the hidden from the public, or, they went to the temple and just exchanged a garland and become married. And if you see, we have a story of a Shakuntala, where she became pregnant. And then her marriage was not known to anyone. But however, her father took her to Dushyant and asked him to accept his child. So there were the stories are there where you would see the child was born. Even the Kunti had the child, that is Karna, was born before marriage, and she has simply abandoned him, but she has not killed him. So the killing or abortion was considered as extremely sinful activity. And during those days, they would basically, what we call, I wouldn't say abandon, or they would just give away the child, in kind of what we call Gurukul, or some kind of the ashrams where they were taken care of. So this was there. And most importantly, when you say the crime happens in the today's era, but why the crime happens is because there is a lack of education to the men, even for the women also. Men and women both are not educated. If you look at that, there is nothing called the absolute superiority to women. It is considered what we call equal. Both are basically compatible. That is what has been mentioned even in the Vedic also. And there is nowhere in the Manusmriti or in the Vedic period, Vedic scriptures, it is mentioned that you should treat women, or use any kind of a force towards women. It is absolutely no-go zone. So that is how they have trained the children since the childhood. So if you're looking at watching, even you watch a Ramayana, or if we watch any those prehistoric the serial, you will see the control on the speech and the respectful treatment towards everyone. So this was a part of the culture. And if you're looking at, there was one incident, was there Shurpanakha wanting to forcefully marry, right? So at the time they have said no initially, and then he has punished her by chopping off the nose, right? So those kind of basically activities did happen, and there were subsequent, what we call, punishment were given. And Ramayana and Mahabharata is the prominent example which tells you what is not acceptable in the society. Ramayana is a story when we are talking about when Ravana abducted a very much married woman, that is Sita Ma, And then Ram could have forgotten her. There was no need for him to pursue Sita till the Sri Lanka and bring her back. I mean, Lanka, right? So here he said, no, if we allow this kind of the act to be forgiven, then there will be anarchy in the society. This kind of act, the act will never be forgiven in the society. This is not acceptable in any form. Abducting a woman or using any kind of a force is completely unforgiven act, and the death was only given. You see that he has not only given the death, but he has defeated him in the war and given and then killed him. The same thing in the Mahabharata. Disrobing the Draupadi was not acceptable. This is very clearly Krishna has mentioned that Draupadi was a queen and she was no ordinary woman, and that act of disrobing in the public preview, if it is acceptable, then the common people will think this is also an acceptable act, which was not acceptable and which is not forgiven in any way. And that is why the Mahabharata Yuddha has happened. So there is a proper punishment must be given, and ensure that these things never happen in the society was again the main teaching is described.